eloquency through what she said to us this morning. So now we'll do, as we usually do, as is our custom, although we don't have any custom. I don't know, maybe Eddie's our traditional leader here. But we'll get our cups of tea and coffee and so on and come back and have a round of discussion. Just back to our speaker and to what she said. I mean, I can hear by the loudness of the discussion that Nomboniso has provoked quite a lot of arguments and exchange in the audience. Please bring your comments and your questions and so on, and present them and ask Nomboniso to deal with them. So can we have hands up for the first round of comments and questions? First, so loud over coffee, so quiet, meek and mild. Who's got a question? Who's got a comment? Chris.
Yeah, thank you for the nice presentation. My question is on, I think you have managed to sort of like diagnose the problem with the NDP. But what I want you to comment in terms of what we do now, what's the way forward?
Right. And any more? Can I want to add in a way to Crispin's question, because Crispin has posed that quite broadly. I also want to pose the question of, in terms of land tenure in these areas and communal land tenure, Nomboniso has pointed to the ways in which traditional authorities have gained control over land under the kind of legislation around communal tenure. And I want to ask the question, what would be a more progressive way of thinking about a communal tenure in those areas and the relation of ordinary people to land there? We've got another question, Gavin.
Yeah, mine just leads on from that, and it's just to ask Nomboniso. During the first ANC administration under Mandela, it seemed as if around the questions of land and communal tenure and the chieftaincy, there was a bit of an attempt to open up the democratic space in terms of land reform, the direction that land tenure reform took. But really, since the Mbeki administration onwards, all the way into the Zuma administration, the trend has been more and more about supporting the powers of chieftaincy against people on the ground, and particularly vulnerable people on the ground. I just wanted to ask Nomboniso why you think the ANC has now got so into bed with the chiefs. Because it seemed there was a moment it could have gone in different directions.
Yeah, I'm not sure that people could hear you at the back, Gavin. Won't you just stand up and maybe rephrase? Oh my gosh, okay, more briefly.
Right, it's a mass movement. Comrades! My question, Comrade Nomboniso, is this. During the first ANC administration of Mandela, the direction in which the government was going to take in relation to the question of the chiefs was an open question. Would South Africa's democratisation be extended to the rural areas, to the former Bantustans, or not? And the question of land and land tenure reform was really key within that. And at that time, there was legislation which was put on the agenda which recognised the land and other rights of ordinary people within rural areas against chiefs, saying actually that these people should have citizenship and they should have rights and they should be recognised. But since 1999, since the Mbeki administration and going into the Zuma administration, the tendency within government policy has been to strengthen the powers of the chiefs over people and over land. So my question to Nomboniso was, why does she think that the ANC has increasingly got into bed with the chiefs since the Mbeki administration onwards? What explains this phenomenon? Why is it that a party or a movement which was dedicated to the liberation of all South Africans, is now moving in the direction that she's described.
Thanks, Gavin. And there's a hand over there. Yes? You?
Thank you very much for the presentation. I'm Mathamu Swap Auckland. I'm from Lesotho. Yes. I'm just surprised that the NDP is silent about gender and culture. My question would be, I just want to know, because I don't know the situation here in the following. Who participates in the formulation of the NDP? Because I would think that there should be a dialogue, social dialogue, where all groups are represented, and then they come up with issues that they want to see the plans having. Also, I'm surprised if the NDP is not saying anything in silence about issues of gender and culture. Because I think South Africa has gender policy in place. And where does it come from? If you have a policy in place, it should have a source where it comes from. Thank you, that's my question.
And then the last question for this round.
Thank you. It puts us from COSATU. I'm not sure. We don't represent the organization, I believe, when we're here. We are invited so that I should not be taken to task. No, I think the issue of fragmentation of the state is quite critical. But most importantly to me was the reference to apartheid. And I think that's, to me, it's a very big statement. If you could compare the current transformation process, there could be regression. But to equate to apartheid, to me, it's a tall road that you could do that. And probably you could engage further to explain how could you link the current challenges to apartheid legacy. Just the second one is that you are saying the wealth seems to be shifting towards those areas where we would say labor reserves would be found, like Bukutatswana you mentioned. But who controls that wealth? That's critical. Because it may move to any other places, but the same monopoly in particular from the white communities will continue to control that, with some little blacks of our deputy president and Dadem Zibe, who are very few in the main. Thank you.
Okay, I think that's, there are other hands, I see other hands, but we'll take that in the second round.
I'll start with the last one, because I think actually that takes us right to the problems that are related to why we are following the trajectory that we're following, which Gavin is raising. Who controls the wealth? It's the same hands, and I made that very clear. And part of propping up chieftaincy and creating new chiefdoms and kingdoms and distorting, the distortions which are not really made by this government, but they are a colonial and apartheid legacy, is in fact about resources. It's less about culture and identity and custom. The most reported story is that of a D account in Northwest, right? Which is basically proceeds from minerals, right? And if you look at the relationship between mining companies and some components of BE, some components of the state and traditional leaders, then you can see that the different sources of wealth that may be covered or will be uncovered in new areas are already being defined in terms of who is going to be in control of that. On the eve of transition, a very dirty deal was made between the apartheid government and the Inkatha Freedom Party, which saw the creation of this monstrous and very powerful entity called Ingonyama Trust. Ingonyama Trust sits on huge deposits, coal deposits, and other deposits that have not yet been declared. But it also sits on huge land, agricultural, whatever remains of agricultural land. I mean, it's incredibly fertile land. So when communities write to Ingonyama Trust and say, can we have access just to SLPs? They're not even asking for a share or anything, but just SLPs with a new mining that would benefit our communities. And Ingonyama Trust says to them, I don't recognize you. Go and get your traditional leaders. Okay? Now you have to have read Shepston, to understand the significance and just how offensive that statement is. When I say that, when I compare it to the apartheid, and I want to make this very clear. I am not doing a comparison like Mampela Rampela, saying this education is worse than Bantu education. But I am saying the laws that government has made, if you saw that map there, it reproduces the apartheid spatial geography. It says that if you live in a traditional council, you cannot bring the cops when a child is violated without the permission of the traditional leader. And we've seen, and I can give you numerous cases related to this. So it's biting, it's uncomfortable, but we do live with apartheid legacy, but we also live with re-engineering of apartheid legacy. And uncomfortable as that is, that's just what it is, and we need to confront that if we want to stop it. I would very much want to get your details, and I'll share particularly the analysis on the traditional courts bill. And those who live, or those who came from Transkei, like me, will recognize the new Matanzimas. Will recognize the new Kaiser Matanzimas that are in the making. Why is NDP unable to deal with this? That's a huge question. It's a huge question which deals with the very vision of the current administration. It is at the core of how does government understand the South African problematic? And how do we address the South African problematic? Now, many of us, Khan is going to be annoyed with me, many of us, including some of those who are in the NDP, are products of the Bolshevian Leninist school of thought. So our approach to political economy is informed by the Bolshevian Leninist thought, where the economy is central, means of production is central, and if you address that, you address everything. Actually, you can't. And that is part of the problem, and that's a huge ideological problem that I think that the NDP itself, whatever contestations that they are there, it needs to deal with. And it's interesting because that Bolshevian approach of an omniscient state that resolves everything, and the political economy that is considered to be so central that all other identities are subsumed in that, coincides, interestingly, with the private sector's own economic fundamentalism. So you have one extreme and another, and actually they meet because really there's an economic determinism that runs through the NDP. So when I look at it and I think, okay, so what is the problem? Because I've been trying to understand what is the problem, and you can see the different voices, but you can also see the meeting points. And even if you go to NEDLEC, Development Chamber, as we did on the Land Amendment Bill, in the final analysis, labor, business, the state, there is this economic determinism that is there. And it's easy for me to say this because I don't have to make these decisions. I can tell you that this is how it's going to affect people. How do you change that? How do you say that actually an omniscient state is not a good alternative? An economic fundamentalism that private sector pushes is not a good option for South Africa. That's a huge development project. It also requires a mindset. I'm 45, so I myself am imprisoned by this kind of thought process because it's the kind of thought process that has shaped me. Why has the ANC gone in this direction? I don't think there's one answer because I don't think there's one ANC. You know, I don't think there's one ANC. I don't think there should be one ANC. You know, there is one organization. There may be, you know, common policy and political position. But as long as you have people who have creative thought processes and so on, they will have different reasons. So some of them are traditionalists, and some of them are traditionalists who want to claim, who believe that their claim to culture is linked to being linked to a traditional leader. Now that's a colonial construction, which we don't question. It also is about a shift, a conservative shift within the ANC in terms of social relations. You go to parliament and make presentations on these things. You listen to radio, you listen to ANC MP particularly Holomisa